nonpartisan, nonprofit policy platform that targets areas such as Medicare, Social Security, the national debt, and other areas of government policy that are confronted with serious failings today. We're going to play a short video telling you a bit about what the plan is, after which Eric will speak about it in more detail. Please welcome Eric Nager.
Thank you.
For America, America's nonpartisan solution to affordable health care, the national debt, and unfunded liabilities. Everyone in America knows one of the greatest challenges we face is access to affordable health care. Insurance prices have skyrocketed almost as fast as our national debt. Another challenge so great, Congress doesn't even bother offering any solutions.
That voice is Terry's son.
Even as the deficit gets bigger every year, they make even more promises to spend money in the future that we won't have. These unfunded liabilities add up to over $150 trillion and may be our greatest challenge yet. All three of these challenges can be overcome, but the time for kicking the can down the road is over. People across America are looking for a way out, and it's time to let them opt for a different plan. Our plan for America takes on all three of these great challenges, providing universal health care, ending the national debt, and funding those promises they made about your Social Security and Medicare. It may sound too good to be true, but it can be done.
I'm here to tell you that it is possible. It is possible.
Since 2010, the payroll tax hasn't been enough to cover benefit payments for the massive baby boomer generation that started to retire. Social Security will have to start to draw down from the trust fund itself to help pay for benefits. And even that fund won't last forever. Experts predict the reserves could run out by 2035, at which point Social Security would only be able to pay about 79% of promised benefits. And the Bipartisan Policy Center, a DC think tank, says the reserves could be depleted by 2028.
Your retirement will never be secure as long as politicians can raid our Social Security and Medicare contributions to spend your money on their unrelated pet projects. Our plan for America protects your retirement by creating an independent trust, nicknamed FAST, with your own individual account. Once people are allowed to have their payroll taxes flow into an account in their name, a contract among the federal government, the 50 states, and you will protect your FAST account. And your guaranteed FAST benefits will never be less than what the present Social Security model promises. In the current system, those benefits just go away when you die. But with Plan for America, these payments pass on to your heirs from generation to generation. By investing your money in a broad index of American companies, instead of the government just using it up, the returns will grow year after year, allowing us to shift from a system built on debt to one based on sustainable growth. This plan benefits us all. Imagine an America where everyone not only has their own retirement plan, but their own healthcare plan too. And people who make less than $40,000 per year have no out-of-pocket healthcare costs. Plan for America enables people to afford health insurance that covers pre-existing conditions and nursing home care without putting a cap on benefits. This is possible if we give people the option to choose the FAST accounts instead of forcing them to pay payroll taxes that add up to $153 out of every $1,000 they earn. Although the government wants this revenue they get from the payroll taxes, they come with unfunded liabilities that will devastate their budgets in the coming years. Their books are way better off without them. The trust will pay out benefits with 2% of the total contributions each year. This cash flow will grow over time and soon pay for itself. Until then, FAST will issue bonds backed by the federal government to cover these initial costs. These bonds will be paid off by the trust and not the government. And the more that's invested in America with FAST, the faster those bonds will no longer be needed. U.S. stock markets have yielded about a 10% compounded annual return over the past century, even when you include the Great Depression. Our model shows this plan works even if stocks return 40% less than that. Let's quit delaying the inevitable and do something. The time to act is now, and our plan for America works for you.
Well, there's a little intro there. Thank you, Ben, for that nice introduction. Thank you, Hillsdale, for inviting me to come speak today. I'm really happy to be here. The Praxis Economic Club took me out to dinner. I mean, I feel like I'm treated like a VIP here. I feel real special. So thank you to talk about this very important topic. We all have another VIP as a guest today in the audience. I'd like to introduce Anne-Marie Schieber of the Heartland Institute. She's the editor for the Healthcare News, which is a healthcare newsletter put out every month by Heartland, and she does a lot of great work in that arena. So take a bow, Anne-Marie. She has some copies with her and are available after the talk today. And really, Anne-Marie is a main reason I'm here today, because I was at Heartland's 40th anniversary banquet in Chicago back in September. Anne-Marie introduced me to President Arnn. I said, wow, I'd love to come to Hillsdale and talk about Plan for America, and here I am. So thank you, Anne-Marie. So how did we get into this mess that was portrayed in our video there? By the way, one of the Praxis members guessed who did the video today, so gold star for that student. How do we get into this mess? Let's start off by talking about how the current system works. How many of you are in jobs where you get paid right now? Some of you, okay. Or you haven't paid. Okay, so you may or may not be aware that 7.65% of your income is deducted from every paycheck. And that's matched by your employer if you're not self-employed. 7.65 plus 7.65, that's 15.3% of your pay goes to money heaven, goes to the government every paycheck to pay for Social Security and Medicare sometime for you in the future. That money is supposed to be in a lockbox. Most of it is supposed to be in what's called the Social Security Trust Fund. But that lockbox doesn't exist anymore because it's been raided over the years by the politicians. They've taken that money and spent it on other things. And the only thing that's in the lockbox today, the only thing that's in the Social Security Trust Fund today is non-negotiable IOUs, which basically means that in order to get money out of the trust fund, the government has to borrow money. So it's almost like saying, really, Social Security is bankrupt today. Now, you will hear politicians say, oh, but it's solvent until the 2030s. Okay, and by the way, each major party candidate in the last election campaigned on no changes to the entitlement programs. You may recall that. What that means is, what those candidates are really saying is massive cuts in your benefits within the decade. I don't think that's what they meant to be saying, but that's what they were saying. So this really has to be addressed. Most of the other solutions we've heard, maybe all the other solutions we've heard, imagine reform within the paradigm of the current system. In other words, well, we'll be solvent for a little longer if we just raise retirement age, or we'll be solvent for a little longer if we just means test. In other words, give the Social Security benefits to the poor people. If you have a certain amount of wealth, you don't get any benefits. Not only isn't that fair, but both of those solutions are really just Band-Aids. They'll give a little more time, but they won't fundamentally solve the problem, which is really demographics. We have the baby boom generation moving into retirement. When Social Security was founded in the 1930s, there were about 40 or 45 workers per retiree. Also, the lifespan of a person in the 1930s was only about 67 years of age. So if you worked until age 65 and you only lived for a couple more years, Social Security was a nice little cushion for you, a nice little safety net, but it didn't last that long. And as the video pointed out, when your spouse passed, Social Security is gone. It ends. So, the demographics kind of worked back then. But now there's only maybe 2 or 3 workers per retiree. And people are living a lot longer. People are regularly living into their 80s, into their 90s. Social Security was never intended to be, and also because a lot of people don't have savings, it's what a lot of people rely on for their retirement. That was never the design of Social Security. So we have a lot of people overly dependent on a system that's fundamentally unsound in how it's structured and how it's set up. And so something has to change, and it would be better to do it while there's still time rather than by painful necessity. At least that's our idea here at Plan for America. So we're going to reimagine the entitlement programs, and that's what I'm going to share with you tonight. And there is a solution. I think you saw an allusion to the debt clock there. Some people, I think, get mesmerized by that thing and say, gosh, those numbers are just off the charts. I can't even think of that much money. How can we possibly get out from under it? It won't be done overnight, but it can be done. And $1 trillion, it's like basically 2 pallets full of $100 bills that's stacked about 6 feet high, covering an entire football field. That's about $1 trillion. So if you think about 150 trillion is our unfunded liability, not to mention the over 30 trillion of our debt, our national debt today, and growing. So there's a lot of work to be done. But the youth, the current generation, your generation, is the ones who need it the most, because there's a name for a program whereby you pay into the system and the people who got in first get paid and the people who get in later don't get anything. What's that called? A Ponzi scheme. That's right. That's kind of what we have. All right. So before I get into the details of the plan, I want to share the nonpartisan credentials of it, because we're in such a polarized time that if a plan gets associated with either major political party, half of the country will hate it on principle. And we don't want that. We want something that's going to benefit everyone. And we think there are aspects of our plan a true liberal would like. We think there are aspects of our plan a true conservative would like. And we can be, in fact, the cover of our book is an elephant and a donkey with their arms around each other as best friends. And that's what we're trying to hope to do. So why would a liberal like our plan? Well, for one thing, it democratizes wealth. There'll be a more equitable distribution of wealth. One thing the left rails on is, hey, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. This will help to equalize that a little bit. There'll be better corporate governance, because in our plan, everyone who participates will be an owner in corporate America. So corporate America will work for the common man and the common woman. And the Wall Street fat cats will be under great scrutiny, because how much are they earning? They're going to be owned by the American people, and they need to be responsible to them. There will be universal and affordable health care with no out-of-pocket costs for low-income Americans. I mean, even the Affordable Care Act does not cover 20 to 30 million Americans. There are a lot of Americans without health care coverage today. In our plan, they would be covered. And there would be a single-payer system, which Bernie Sanders has said that he wants. Okay, he wants a public single-payer. Ours is a private single-payer. But nevertheless, it's single-payer. So a true liberal should like that. And there is a U.S. government guarantee. There is a role for the U.S. government to play, albeit a lesser role. But there is a role for the U.S. government to play, which I think would assure our friends on the left. What about our friends on the right? And let's put the libertarians there with them as well. Our plan will eventually eliminate federal and state debts, including the unfunded liability. So getting rid of debt is a good thing from a conservative standpoint. Tax reduction for individuals and businesses, and eventual elimination of all taxation of every sort. I'll explain that later. For our libertarian friends, it's voluntary, not compulsory. You don't have to opt into the system. You may opt into the system. We think it's designed such that the goodies are so good you will want to be part of the system, but nevertheless, you can stay in the old one if you want to. The size of government will diminish, and participants get to keep the wealth they've earned. No one pays for anyone else's health care. Everyone would have an individual account. So these are some tenets that we think conservatives and libertarians would like. How did this idea come about? My brother Terry is a CFP, which stands for Certified Financial Planner, and he's been one for over 40 years. And the genesis of this idea was that once he became an empty nester, his form of recreation, he liked to take long walks on the beach. This is in the Gulf Coast of the United States. And he worried about what the future held for his children and his grandchildren. And would they have the same opportunities in this country that he had growing up? And he was worried that, well, maybe they won't have those opportunities. So he tried to think of putting on his Certified Financial Planner hat. He tried to think of what would be a reasonably comprehensive financial plan for every U.S. citizen. And a reasonably comprehensive financial plan has about 5 elements to it. And they are retirement, investments, taxation, insurance, and estate planning. So retirement, you want to have a secure income in retirement. You want to have an investment portfolio that is managed or has a goal in mind. You have to take taxation into account. You need life insurance and maybe other types of insurance as well. And estate planning, what's going to happen for your heirs? Will you leave a legacy? All these things are part of financial planning, and all of these are addressed in Plan for America, as you will see. So we have all of this debt. There really are only 4 ways to handle debt. If you have a personal loan or anything like that, you already know this. If you're going to try to get rid of debt, one thing is you can try to roll it over. In other words, just refinance it, keep it going. That's what the government has done with our debt for quite some time now. And at some point, the music will stop and someone will not have a chair. But that's what we're trying to do. We can try to inflate it away. The outgoing administration took us down inflation road there, a little memory lane there, going back to the 80s with, well, that creates high interest rates and therefore makes borrowing money more expensive and has its own kind of problems. So inflation is really not an attractive way to get rid of debt. You can repudiate it, which is to say, I'm not going to pay it. We've seen some countries like Argentina in the past repudiate their debt, and it didn't work out well for them. It would really be bad for the country that has the reserve currency of the world, namely the US dollar. So really the only palatable choice here is pay it off, the fourth view, or the fourth option. So how can we possibly do that? Well, it's kind of like the answer to the question, how do you eat an elephant? Does anyone know the answer? Yes. One bite at a time. That's exactly right. So you can't eat it all at once, but one bite at a time, it can be done. All right, here is government debt. Today, as of 2023, the source of this slide is the Congressional Budget Office. Fiscal year 2024 just ended on September 30, so I just have these right here. And I think I have a pointer here too, do I not? Yep, there it is. Okay, so the inner circle is revenue. We're not really going to focus on that. We're going to focus on the outer circle, which is expenses. Total outlays, $6.1 trillion with a T. So that's 6 football fields of money just in 1 year. 3.8 trillion of the 6.1 is, as this doesn't show up very well, but it's mandatory spending, like the entitlement programs. So 3.8 of 6.1, that's about 63% of the federal government's expenditures are tied up in mandatory programs like these entitlements, and it's only getting bigger. Then you add on the 0.7 here is interest on the debt. Okay, so as interest rates have risen, interest on the debt grows as a percentage of the pie. So you add this, the 0.7 to the 3.8, you get about 4.5 trillion of the 6. That's about 3/4 of the budget of the United States government goes to pay for mandatory programs like our entitlements and interest on the debt. That only leaves about 25%, which is, whoops, let me go back to that. 25% or 1.7 trillion in discretionary spending like defense or other things. So this rapidly becomes a national security issue here. The U.S. debt is a national security risk because there are bad actors in the world who are spending a lot on their militaries and getting stronger and stronger, and we have to keep pace. So this is kind of tries to cast that in stark relief. All right. One thing we propose with our plan is to enact it by contract law. That, we believe, will have more staying power than if it was merely done by legislation, because if one party enacts some legislation, well, 4 years later or 2 years later when another party comes into power, that legislation can be reversed, and we want this plan to have staying power. So we think if it was done by contract law, I mean, ideally it would be great to have a constitutional amendment, but that takes a lot of time. So our plan is to try to do it by contract law. The three parties to the contract would be the United States government, the state governments collectively, and the third participant would be a private trust to be established by the plan, representing the people. Now, in a contract, in any good contract, you give something up in order to get something in return. And ideally, it will be a win-win for everyone. For the people, represented by the trust, what you gain is tax-favored retirement benefits. Right now, when you pay your 15.3%, your payroll taxes that go off to the government, you don't get a tax deduction for that. You would under our plan. And also your benefits when you withdraw them would be tax-free, and Social Security is not today. You'd also get universal, affordable, high-quality health care, which we will cover. Those are nice benefits for the people. For the federal government, you get relief from $150 trillion of unfunded liabilities. I don't see any other way the federal government can get out from under that, as we looked at the 4 ways to get rid of debt, other than a plan like this. So the relief from those unfunded liabilities would be a huge benefit for the federal government. And it'll be much easier to balance budgets then with all that mandatory spending off the books. The state governments get relief from Medicare requirements and help with their public pensions. As I was talking with Anne-Marie briefly before the talk tonight, there are several states who are underwater with their pensions. Illinois and California come to mind. There's probably some others, meaning these states have pensions for their public workers, their teachers, their firefighters, their policemen, and there's not enough money in these pensions to fund this. And it's another demographic sword of Damocles hanging over their head. If these pensions could be moved into the plan, that would get it off the state books, and the states would be a winner too. So win-win-win, ideally. I'm just going to cover 4 provisions of the contract. There's a lot here, and we can get you more information on the plan if you'd like it. The website is planforamerica.us. You can order the brand new white paper, and we have lots of other information too. But I've alluded to a couple of these already. One provision of the contract is the federal government, in exchange for being relieved of all these unfunded liabilities, they have to give up something too. They agree to make contributions tax deductible going in and tax-free coming out. So they're going to give up a little tax revenue. They're also going to allow dividends to be tax deductible to corporations and tax-free to recipients, because we want to incentivize a shift of culture here. We want to go from a culture of debt, which we kind of are today, to a culture of equity, meaning ownership in corporate America. So treating dividends this way will be beneficial for that goal. The government guarantees the fast debt. Okay, so this For America Security Trust is going to be set up. They're not going to have a lot of money when this plan starts, and there are the people who opt in who are current recipients of Social Security, the promises need to be kept to them. The payments still have to go to them. So the FAST will have the ability to issue bonds, and the federal government will guarantee the bonds and pay the interest on them. So these bonds are not government debt. They're coming from a private entity, but the U.S. government will still guarantee them. And we think, what may be one of the more unique provisions of this plan is that there is a funding mechanism to actually retire the debt. When you look at the payroll taxes, that's roughly $1 trillion a year. So hypothetically, if everyone opted in, $1 trillion would go into the FAST accounts, and the FAST itself would take 2% as a fee every year of those assets. 2% of $1 trillion is $20 billion in the year one. In year two, you'd have the $20 billion already in there, you get another $20 billion plus any market growth. So it's going to grow rapidly over time. What that money is used for is initially to pay off the current retirees so that during the transition, so that the promises will be kept, and then ultimately it will retire all those unfunded liabilities. So that 2% funding mechanism is kind of the magic, really, of this whole plan. So let's say you opt into the plan. How does it work? I'm going to talk about the retirement side first, and then we'll talk about the healthcare side. So let's say you think, hey, this sounds great, I'm going to opt in. So the 15.3, instead of going to the government, goes into a personal account in your name, like a 401k plan. Now, lest any of you are shedding a tear for the lost revenue for the government, I think the year was 2020 when the payroll taxes were less than the benefits paid out. We reached the tipping point where there are fewer taxes coming in than benefits that are being paid out. So if the government gives up both, it's a net gain. So you get your own private account. There's no investment choice for you, okay? The investments are an all-market index of U.S. domiciled publicly traded companies. We don't want choice there because we don't want anyone picking winners and losers. And the great thing about an all-market index is it would be virtually costless to administer. You could bid it out to one of the big index fund companies like BlackRock or Vanguard, and they might charge a basis point for something this big. A basis point is 1/100th of 1%. Very, very minimal cost. So there's really not a lot of overhead then in the trust, and the bulk of that 2% can then go to retire debt and pay off current retirees and all that. We don't want high costs there. And that's my third point, that it would be negligible cost to administer this index. Meanwhile, we think that corporate America would be tripping over themselves to get listed on this index, because if you knew for a fact that $1 trillion every year is flowing into the capital markets, you want to be listed on that index. So that's going to incentivize companies to go public. It's going to incentivize them to be located in the United States and subject to generally accepted accounting principles and all the scrutiny that goes with publicly traded companies. We think that's going to be great for openness and good information. At retirement, you will be, as a participant, you'll be guaranteed to get the highest of 3 different calculations. Worst case scenario, you'll get what you would have gotten under Social Security. So if anyone ever tries to demagogue this plan and say, oh, you're taking away my Social Security, well, no, we're not, because you're at least going to get that and probably a lot more. Option 2 is the money that you put into the plan compounded at a 4% rate over time, or most likely, and best of all, you'll get 4% of your actual market returns through time. So in other words, when you retire, once you hit retirement, you trigger a cash flow from your retirement account of 4% of the balance of that account when you retire. And it can go higher, but it can never go lower than that. That's the minimum you're guaranteed to get for your whole time. So ideally, the market will have been growing at higher than 4% a year over your working years, and that's why option 3 is the most likely. Option 2 would be a very conservative, not very dynamic market over time. So the most likely scenario is you get 4% of actual market returns through time, and that's when you trigger your cash flow. Oh, and by the way, you saw in the film that the Social Security card got torn up at the passing of the beneficiary, and as it is today. But when you trigger a cash flow under our plan, the cash flow goes to you. When you pass, it goes to your spouse. When your spouse passes, it goes to your heirs forever. Tax-free forever. It's your money. That's why this is so much better than Social Security, and that's why we think people will want to sign up, because you're leaving a legacy for generations you'll never even know. Now, lest people are concerned about market volatility, we have some mechanisms in the plan to deal with that. But we feel that the capital markets are the best vehicle to solve this problem. And as you can see, this is Investopedia is the source of this graph. And you can see that this is since 1928, so 6 years, almost a century of returns. We can see that 68% of the time the market is up, and the market has averaged about a 10% return, every year for a century. Now, our plan, because we want to be in compliance with Congressional Budget Office assumptions, we only assume a 6.2% rate of return. And the plan still works. But you could do a lot better if we get 10%. So I'll show you some calculations both ways. The reason it works at 6.2% is a retiree gets a 4% payout, the trust takes 2%, that's 6, and so the 0.2 is still working. So that's why it still works at 6.2. But it works great at 10. Now, you can see here on the edges, there's some extreme things. In fact, when we were first building this model, before we had a PhD who built an economic model for us in conformity with CBO, Congressional Budget Office, and Social Security assumptions, we kind of did our own spreadsheet exercise and said, well, what if this plan began, say, in 1930, right before the Great Depression? And we used those actual market returns. And it did work. It was a little bumpy at first, but it did work. So this is how we want to use this is why the market is such a powerful tool, why we think this will work. Okay, so let's say, here's an illustration. And this is why we think a 25-year-old would want to join this plan. And some of you in this classroom aren't too far away from that, maybe. So let's take a single mom, maybe an inner city mom, who works for 40 years and she never makes more than $25,000 a year, okay? Not a high-paying job, but a steady paycheck for 40 years. She never makes more than $25,000 a year. Under the current system, she might not have anything other than Social Security. She may not have any legacy for her heirs in terms of an inheritance to pass down to them. Her Social Security estimate is less than $15,000 a year. Now, let's say instead she opted into the For America Security Trust. And let's say the market only grew at 6.2%, which is all the CBO is allowing us. Her fast balance after 40 years would be $381,837. Her fast payout would be 4% of that, at least the first year, which would give her $15,273. That's more than Social Security. Not a lot more, but more. And also tax-free in perpetuity. So she would, that $15,000 a year cash flow would also go to her heirs, whereas the Social Security would stop when she died. And the $15,000, again, is just the beginning, because if her account balance grew, she would get raises too every year. By the way, the principal stays in the trust. So the trust can keep taking that 2%, and the trust can retire that debt. Now, let's look at it if she got 10%, which is really what the market has returned historically. Her Social Security estimate would still be the same, but at 10% a year, and this is the power of compounding, boys and girls. I'm sure you're already learning this here at Hillsdale, that it's, Albert Einstein called it the eighth wonder of the world, compounding interest. We want to harness it on our behalf instead of as debtors. Her fast balance with an average return of 10.2% a year over 40 years would be $1.1 million. She'd be a millionaire even though she only never made more than $25,000 a year. Her fast payout at retirement would be $45,362. That's just for starters. Again, that's the first year. It'd probably go up from that as the market grew. So $45,000 a year, tax-free in retirement every year, and passed on to her heirs in perpetuity. That is a better deal. Now, what if the market has a bad year? I know you're thinking that. What if the market has a bad year? It happens. About almost 1 in every 4 years is a down year. So we have to take that into account too. However, we do think a lot of the market volatility will be minimized by our plan because how many of you know what dollar cost averaging is? Yes, well, I would expect you to know. Dollar cost averaging, you mean you buy periodically, whether what you're buying is up or down or holding flat, and that's what would be happening when your payroll taxes were going into that account and buying into the market. You'd be buying into it every pay period. We think, there'd always be buying, so that would level off, we think, some of the volatility. At any rate, you're going to get that 4% balance. Now, if let's just say the year after you retired, your balance dipped below what it was when you retired. But you're still going to get that guaranteed 4% at what you triggered at retirement, but it would just be taking a little bit more from the principal. What we want to avoid is something called drawdown. And drawdown, when you get below, if an account gets below 60%, that's when there's trouble because let's just say your account shrank. We had a very severe market. Your account balance shrank to 60% of what it was as retirement, and you're still taking 4% draw of the original amount, and then the 2%, the trust is taking 2%. All of a sudden, 6 on 60 is a 10% draw. That is not sustainable for a retirement account. And we in the investment advisory business say that a sustainable rate of withdrawal in retirement is no more than 4 or 5%, and that's why our plan has 4. So we want to avoid drawdown. So what happens is when your account balance drops below what it was at retirement, an interest-free loan against your account automatically kicks in to bring the account balance back up to what it was when you retired. And during that time when you have that loan, you can get no more than the 4% you started drawing at retirement. But once the market recovers and your loan is paid off, then you can get those raises again. So you're guaranteed to get that minimum 4%, but a loan kicks in the down years until the market recovers. And we looked at this, like I said, when we went through the Great Depression. There were several years when loans were necessary, but once we got through the 30s and after World War II, the market took off and there was never any problem after that. And the loans get repaid in a good market year. So we can address these questions as we go, or I'm going to allow questions at the end. So hope you're thinking of some good ones. All right. So what about current retirees? There's still some goodies here. Why they want to opt into the system? The FAST will issue bonds against the 2% cash flow. So unlike the U.S. government, when the FAST issues bonds, there's a cash flow stream that's coming in regularly every year to pay for it. When the U.S. government doesn't have money, they borrow more or they print more. So we think the case could be made that the paper for the FAST is even going to be better paper than U.S. government debt. And like we said, the government guarantees the bonds and pays interest on the bonds. The trust will eventually retire the bonds itself. The trust will do that. but the government has a role, and we think that role is really just to build confidence with the U.S. public that this is a good idea. I mean, the government role is not tremendous in the sense that the cash flow will be there to retire these bonds. The government's not going to have to step in and make good on these bonds. These bonds are not going to default, is what I'm saying. Okay, we're going to shift gears now, and we're going to talk about health care, because this is the bigger part of the problem. Social Security, of all the unfunded liabilities and debt that the government has, Social Security represents about 15% of it. Health care represents about 85% of it. So this is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, not Social Security. And of the 15.3% of your payroll taxes, it's about 12.4 goes to Social Security, but only 2.9 goes to health care. So the minority of the money and the majority of the problem is on the health care side. All right, so let's say you opt in to the retirement side. You are automatically eligible and issued a healthcare policy which is uni-age, unisex, good in any state, and completely transportable. There are no pre-existing conditions like the Affordable Care Act. You can stay on your parents' plan until age 26 like the Affordable Care Act. These are some things the American people like. We don't want to upset the apple cart. $1 million cap on benefit, $1 million lifetime cap on benefit. So this is to limit the liability of the insurance companies, and it's also to give enough money for most Americans to cover you. And you can spend this money however you'd like, by the way. You don't have to spend it on traditional medicine unless you want to. You can spend it on alternative care. It's your money. You can spend it however you like. But we think that provisions of the plan will mitigate against healthcare inflation. We'll get to that. So that includes, by the way, nursing home care, which is not covered by Medicare today. Nursing home care is not covered if you're a retiree. That's why we think retirees would like to opt into this. You can pay for nursing home care too. So that's the highlight of this. And if you can't afford the premium, by the way, is $10,000 a year per person, not per household, per person. This was devised by calculating the per capita spend of health care in this country. So the premium would be $10,000 a year plus a $1,200 health savings account. So that's there at the top. You get, so the premium really would be $11,200. The health savings account portion, the $1,200, is guaranteed to cover your deductibles and copays throughout the year, because we want to encourage people to be preventive in their health care and be proactive about it. Any portion of the health savings account you do not spend is returned to you at the end of the year tax-free. So the base part of it is a $10,000 premium. Now, what if that $10,000 premium is not affordable to you? Well, if you make $40,000 or less as an individual, or $80,000 or less as a married couple, you're entitled to a 100% or an interest-free loan against your retirement account up to 100% of the premium. In other words, no out-of-pocket costs for you if you are married and earn less than 80, or single earning 40 or less. And there's a sliding scale. So if you earn up to 50, you get a 75% loan against your premium to pay your premium. If you earn up to 60, you get 50% loan. So this makes it all affordable. Now, what happens with these loans? Anytime there's a loan against your retirement account, it automatically triggers a life insurance policy to the size of the loan. So at your passing, if you owe money, the life insurance pays into your retirement account and the account is made whole. Now, there is a premium for the life insurance that's tacked onto the loan too. I mean, the life insurance isn't free, but for a young, healthy person, that premium would be minimal. And so the life insurance protects against you having to come out of pocket for this money. And while there is a loan against the account. Remember, you just get the basic 4% draw as opposed to raises, but it's still, you get tax-free income in retirement and no out-of-pocket health care costs. Now, what about the guy who never works a day in his life? Well, we have an answer to that too. So let's say there's a young man at age 26, gets off his parents' health care plan and decides not to go to work. He opted into Plan for America, so he has a retirement account, but there's no money in the retirement account because he's not working. He still is entitled to get the health care though because he opted in. So the health care is, and let's just say he lives for 60 years, okay? He gets the health care plan at age 26, he lives to age 86, and he dies. And so 60 years, he's been getting interest-free loan against his non-existent retirement account. And just for round numbers, I'm just going to multiply 60 times 11,000, and he's at death he owes $660. It'll actually be a little more than that because of premiums for the life insurance. But at any rate, the life insurance loan is in effect all these years, and at his passing, $660,000 is paid into his retirement account, which now for the first time ever has money in it. Because again, he never worked a day in his life. Now, what the trust could do is just pay off the debt and call it even. But the trust doesn't want to do that. The trust wants the time value of the money. Well, the trust wants the 2% every year because eventually, after enough time, that's going to be way more than the $660,000. So the trust is just going to continue to take 2%. The 4% that this account would trigger for retirement doesn't go to anybody, it goes to pay off the loan. The trust is taking 2% off the 660, 4% is triggered to pay off the loan. So the loan will be paid back at a maximum of 25 years. If the market does better, it'll be paid back quicker than that. But at the very least, because 4% times 25 is 100%, 100% of the loan will be guaranteed to be retired in 25 years. At that point, 25 years down the road, there's a 4% cash flow that's still going to happen. And if this guy had any heirs, cash flow goes to the heirs.
What's your definition of an heir?
An heir, okay, it could be child, grandchild, it could be a named charity, like a will. I mean, it's like whatever you want it to be. You get to name it. So here's a guy who never worked a day in his life, and after his loan is paid off, his heirs will get a retirement benefit.
So if he likes little cat ladies, they get the money.
Exactly. Maybe the Humane Society. That could be the beneficiary in perpetuity. Whatever you want, it's your money. It's kind of the whole idea. Now, we talked earlier, why would a 25-year-old want to opt in? And that made a lot of sense, I think. I think we hopefully would agree. Why would a 50-year-old want to opt in? I'm going to answer the question for a 75-year-old too. But let's just say a 50-year-old, this is someone maybe more than halfway through his or her career. You still have some earning years left, ideally your peak earning years toward the tail end of your career. So why would you want to opt in if you maybe couldn't get the full benefit of saving that money over time? Well, if you earned less than $40,000 a year, you'd have no out-of-pocket health care costs. That's one reason you might want to opt in. Your retirement is still going to be what Social Security would have been, so you're not losing anything there. You're going to get at least what you would have had under Social Security, and you're going to have better health care. You could still contribute to your retirement account while you're working. You still have some working years left until age 65. So let's just say for 15 years you put in $7,500 a year and it grew at 6.2%. You'd have a retirement account balance of $177,000 at age 65. So you'd get that 4% of that cash flow too. So you'd have a nice little supplement there. And that money, plus any money, if you earned less than $40,000, if you had those loans against your healthcare premiums against your retirement account, that will be paid into your retirement account at your death. You'd also have a legacy for your heirs too in perpetuity after those loans were repaid. And if you didn't need any loans, then what you put into the retirement account could then, the cash flow from that could go to your heirs in perpetuity. So we think it would make sense for a 50-year-old to want to join the plan. What about a 75-year-old? This is someone whose working career is over. You're not going to be earning money to put into a retirement account. Why would you want to be in the plan? Well, again, no out-of-pocket health care costs. Now, even seniors on Medicare are still paying money for prescription drugs and other things that aren't covered, nursing home care. So there's still plenty of outgoing money if you're a retiree today under the current plan. So you'd have no out-of-pocket health care costs if you earn less than $40,000 a year. You could use your health care now for nursing home care if you wanted to or needed to. You're still guaranteed the Social Security benefit. And if you have a health care loan, when it's repaid, that goes into your retirement account, and when the loan is gone, you can also have a legacy for your heirs too, even as a 75-year-old. All right, depending on these numbers I think are updated now with the new white paper, but what this is basically showing, it's 6.2%. The lines cross around 2071, meaning that that's the point at which all unfunded liabilities are gone. So the blue line, the dark line that starts at the bottom, that's how much the trust is borrowing in the transition years. And when the lines cross about 2071, that's when all unfunded liabilities are gone. That's at 6.2. At 10.2 market returns, the lines cross much closer to the mid-2050s, which is, it's light at the end of the tunnel. I didn't promise it would be overnight. But under the current plan, there is no solution. There is no end of the debts. So this offers, I think, some hope. And by the way, at the time when those lines cross, the 2% funding mechanism isn't needed to pay off the current retirees anymore. So the 2% funding mechanism, by terms of the contract, goes 50% to the federal government and 50% to the state governments as the source of revenue for government, eliminating the need of taxation of any kind. The government would not need to be funded. There would be no income tax. There'd be no estate tax. There'd be no capital gains tax. There'd be no inheritance tax. There'd be no sales tax. There'd be no tax of any kind, because this 2% by that point would be so huge it could fund government. And for the state governments, their share of their 50% is based upon the percentage that state contributes to gross domestic product. So these states would be incentivized to be business-friendly environments to create that gross domestic product that would bring in more money for the state. They'll be competing with each other to get that business. I touched on this before, why we think the FAST debt might be even better than U.S. government debt. It's because the FAST bonds can only be used for one thing. They can't be rated like the lockbox was. The lockbox was rated and other stuff was paid for it, paid for other stuff. The FAST can only be used to pay for current retirees or loan to current participants. And the 2% funding mechanism will eventually retire the debt. So there is a way for this to happen other than just printing money or borrowing money, which the U.S. government does today. And of course, the U.S. government will guarantee the interest on the bonds as long as they are needed, and at some point they will no longer be needed. There are many other ramifications for this that I won't get into because I really do want to allow time for questions. We're almost at the end, I promise. Why is this going to be so good for corporate governance? Okay, all of you who opt into the plan, you're now owners of corporate America. You get to vote the proxies on the ownership of all these companies. So if the trustees of the trust are going to appoint mini boards by industry to send out reports ahead of every annual meeting of every company that's on that publicly traded index. And they're going to give you statistics on how does this company stack up in terms of executive compensation, in terms of other things. And if a company's out of line, guess what? You, the voter, are going to fire that management because that management is going to answer to you. You own the company. And that's going to create good corporate governance across this country. We'll shift from a culture of debt to a culture of equity. And once the debt, yeah, I already explained this too. The 2% goes 50% to the government and 50% to the states to fund government, and we don't need any taxes anymore. This is what happens if we do nothing. Guess we could invert this because we're really kind of like going off a cliff or off a waterfall. It looks like the debt just skyrockets even more than it is today by the latter part of this century. So what can you do to help? Well, you can like us on Facebook. You know, you can join this movement, introduce us to thought leaders. You know, if we only had a president who thought big, he loved big ideas. He wanted to leave a legacy for himself. He didn't have to worry about re-election. Someone like that could maybe like what we're doing. I don't know if anyone knows a president like that. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, by the way. We have a podcast that's on Apple and Spotify and all your major sources, and love to have you on it, Gary, one of these times if you can do it. Anne-Marie's been a guest. See, it's fun, isn't it, Anne-Marie? It's fun to be a guest. Okay. And write or call your elected officials and say, hey, what do you think about Plan for America? And after you hear the word, huh? You know, what's Plan for America? You know, maybe you can get a little groundswell of interest going because we have to do something. And now I'd like to open it for your questions. Yes, sir.
When you say something, a company has to have an American domicile.
Yes.
How would you deal with Apple, who has their American domicile, but they do a lot of their manufacturing in China? How does that?
They'd be considered a U.S. domicile company. They're headquartered here. They're subject to U.S. corporate law. You know, I think we're talking about some companies that did inversions, you know, and actually headquartered overseas. We think those would be the ones that would be ripe to come back. And also, a salutary thing of this is our corporations in this country with more money flowing into the markets would be able to buy subsidiaries in other countries and bring them under U.S. accounting principles and U.S. guidance and all that.
So the idea is to use U.S. principles even if it is overseas.
I mean, a U.S. domiciled company can certainly have interests overseas and operations overseas and all that kind of stuff, but for reporting purposes, for filing purposes, I mean, they are domiciled in the United States. We only want U.S. domiciled companies on this index. And so we think companies would be tripping over each other to get on this index. They'd be retiring their bonds. So that's another ramification I didn't really talk about. You know, with the fast issuing bonds, that's a lot of bonds going into the bond market, but corporations would be withdrawing their bonds to go public and get listed on this index. So we think that would be somewhat offsetting. Ben, or should I call you Mr. President?
That's fine. So two related questions. First, just to clarify, a person can choose to opt into this at any point in their life. Is that right?
That's correct.
So what's stopping someone from first throughout their career investing in a traditional IRA or retirement funds, and then they've retired, they have their money, they're comfortable, and then and only then do they opt into PFA, at which point they have free healthcare and they're probably in the most vulnerable.
Well, it's not free healthcare. Are you talking about a wealthy person now?
Well, they'd be wealthy, but they technically don't have any income.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I mean, I suppose something like that could happen, but keep in mind, if that person is in his or her working years, you want to be in the retirement plan now because the 15.3% is tax deductible during your working years. If you stay outside of the plan during your working years, that 15.3 is just going away. You don't get a tax deduction for that.
Well, two things there. Well, so two concerns come to mind there. First of all, this could just be my rough calculations off the top of my head being wrong, but it seems like $1 million a year in retirement, even though the value of that is delayed temporarily, is probably going to exceed that tax deduction. And second, that comparative benefit of opting into PFA earlier goes away the second the taxation starts to go down. I think that's in the best case scenario.
Okay, I'm not sure I got the second part of what you were saying.
Well, so you highlight the fact that if you're thinking about potentially investing in a conventional retirement fund as
Yes.
opposed to PFA, the benefit of the latter is
Yeah.
taxation would otherwise be substantial. And you highlight that in the best case scenario, the tax burden imposed on that person and everyone else diminishes, if not goes to zero.
Okay, well, one aspect I did not mention, because there are many aspects to this plan, I couldn't cover them all. For the wealthier individuals, we want to encourage the fast balance to be built up as quickly as possible. So the bigger that is, the more the 2% is to retire the debts. So if you're a wealthy individual, you can, in addition to your 15.3%, and by the way, no cap on that. Under Social Security, your benefits are capped. Your income is only so much of your income goes toward Social Security. Here, if you earned $1 million, the whole $153,000 would go into your retirement account. So that's another reason to want to opt into the FAST. Don't want to lose my train of thought. That was an aside. If you are a wealthier individual, you can also, in addition to the 15.3, you can contribute up to an additional $100,000 a year into your FAST account, tax deductible, to encourage the balances to grow faster. So you not only could you put your 15.3% in uncapped, tax deductible, you could put in an additional $100,000 a year if you wanted to. It's another incentive to want to be in the plan. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned, earlier in the presentation, how they would have index funds for everybody, through large corporations. I guess, how would you partner with those corporations without, being accused of, crony capitalism? Because it seems like you'd be giving a lot of favoritism to, whatever companies you decided to work with.
Well, they'd have to qualify to be on an index, like a company qualifies to be on the S&P 500, for example. This would be even broader than that. This would be maybe more like a Russell 2000 maybe, or something like that. But, the independent, or the whoever we bid this out to, the Vanguard or the BlackRock would, vet that and see what companies qualified to be on the index. So it wouldn't be like picking winners or losers. I mean, the companies would have to have a certain amount of income and disclose their records and all this kind of stuff, and to be eligible to be listed on there. So we wouldn't really be favoring certain companies. If they qualify to get in the index, they'd be in the index. Yeah. So. Oh, absolutely.
What about companies like BlackRock and Vanguard? Wouldn't they be getting kind of that favoritism?
Well, I mean, they manage, which the question was about BlackRock and Vanguard, would they be getting any favorable treatment here? They already run a lot of index funds. This would be like running any other index fund. Their compensation for that would probably be only about a basis point a year, which is, it would be a lot of money because there'd be a lot in the trust. So it would be lucrative to them, but the trustees of the trust would be free to bid that out every so often, so it wouldn't necessarily stay with one fund company all the time. Maybe Vanguard would win a 5-year contract and then it would be reopened, and then maybe BlackRock would take it for a while, or, there'd still be competition for that. No company would just be awarded it forever, and because that could, yeah. But again, it is an all-market index, so there's not too much the Vanguards and the BlackRocks could do anyway. I mean, they're just administering an index. It's not like they could really interfere in that. Yeah, yes, sir.
I'd just like to hit on the BlackRock and Vanguard one more time. Are we at all concerned, with the ethics of a BlackRock and Vanguard? I mean, looking at the last 2 years, all the agendas that they've pushed past, Marxism, BLM.
Yes, great question. And
how would that be?
Well, the reason they've been so powerful in that arena is because they're voting so many of the proxies. But under Plan for America, they would vote no proxies, because the people would be the owners of the plan, or the owners of the trust. And so the proxies would go to the participants in the trust only, not to the funds administering the trust. So BlackRock and Vanguard would have no leverage in voting these proxies, because they're simply the administrators, not the owners. That makes sense, yeah.
I pay in, and I have a proxy, but to what exactly? Because you've got a bunch of companies, I
Yeah.
don't get to vote on all of these companies.
Sure you do. Yeah.
So are we gonna have big Zoom meetings?
Well, the way we envision it is that the trustees of the trust, which by the way are elected by the participants and serve no more than 5-year terms, and can't have come from government or anything, no conflicts of interest.
Give someone else my proxy, it's mine, right?
It's yours, that's right. You don't give anyone, if you don't vote, you don't vote, but if it's yours. So the trustees of the trust would appoint mini boards, as we see, experts in certain industries, maybe accountants in the finance industry. And these mini boards would be tasked with producing reports ahead of the annual meeting of every one of these companies. And I think, if you're an owner in that company, you're going to be inclined to pay attention. I mean, with power taken away from the politicians, think about this. We get the politicians out of healthcare and retirement. There's a lot less damage they can do. All of a sudden, these proxy elections might be a lot more important than some of our political elections.
So let's say 5 years from now, 5 years, for instance.
Yeah.
And we all have proxies. And
Yeah.
so we don't like the way they're doing business, and we group together and say, okay, let's vote this way on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That could absolutely happen. And these mini boards would be given kind of like a score sheet to the participants before the annual meeting to say, hey, this is what they're doing. These are the numbers. This is how they've done this last year. This is the executive compensation. Do you want to vote with the directors or not, on these initiatives? And so.
This would be an amazing amount of information.
Oh, it would. It would, but hey, you're an owner of corporate America, you have responsibility. You don't have to exercise it, but you'd have the option.
How many
Yes, sir.
companies would a person have then?
How many what?
How many companies would be in this
Oh.
that a person might be thinking that I've got to vote on?
A couple thousand maybe?
These guys take a lot of exams.
Yeah, I know. Hey, you could always put it in the circular file, so not everyone would participate. But I think once we shifted to a culture of equity from a culture of debt, I think we'd be really interested in that and say, wait a minute, this is my retirement. These guys are doing what with this company? Hold on a second. I'm paying attention to that because this is money that's mine and it's going to my heirs forever, and I want to make sure they're operating correctly. I think people would pay attention. I mean, you'd definitely be incentivized to pay attention.
If you have 1,000 companies, and let's say, and whatever amount of money, and let's
Yeah.
say they're all, just to simplify it, they're all
Yeah.
equal. I've got to put how much time into each one of those things. It's a concentrated benefit and dispersed cost.
Well, the annual meetings would probably be at various times throughout the year, so probably wouldn't all hit you at once. There are going to be, and not every company will have equal weighting. Some will be bigger than others. There are going to be some companies you have maybe a particular interest or an affinity with because you like that industry or you own something that company's produced. There's some that are not going to appeal to you. So, but that's up to the individual to decide. But the information would be available to you, and this is one thing that will create, we think, better corporate governance than we have today.
So
Yeah.
if I'm married, my wife and I would have a proxy mate way to do things, right?
Sure, you two could
Bad joke.
you could vote together on things. Make it a date night, You could do all kinds of fun stuff. Yes.
Do you foresee any problems for companies being like, I don't want all of these people starting to have a say in how the company is run?
Companies might not want to have, the company would be free not to be listed on the index. The company could stay a private company, not be publicly listed, and if it didn't want all that scrutiny or all the money available to it through the.
But then would there be a problem, do you possibly foresee, of like not enough companies signing up, or do you just think that
We believe companies will be tripping over each other to get access to $1 trillion of capital that's coming in every single year without exception. We think they'll be tripping over each other to get listed on this index. They'd be salivating at the mouth. How do I get access to that money? They'd love it, we think. We think investment bankers would think this is fantastic. There'd be so many initial public offerings. They'd be popping up all over the place. Be a gold mine for the investment banks, we believe. Yes, Anne-Marie.
You want to talk a little bit about the home ownership?
Oh, yeah, this came up a little bit at dinner time. One of the questions was, What other innovations to the plan have you thought about or talked about? And this is not, it's possible, it's not necessarily part of the core proposal, but we've talked about having loans against your retirement account to pay for down payment on a house, because home affordability has become such an issue now. It's so difficult, particularly for first-time home buyers, to have that. So why not maybe a loan against your retirement account for a down payment? We've also talked about an aspect of it of universal basic income that could be accommodated in it as well. But those aren't part of the core proposals now, but there's some flexibility in this that other aspects could be incorporated. So thank you for mentioning that, Emery. Yeah, well, let's go to the back here, lady in the back.
You might have covered this in the talk, but how would this go if we hit like another great recession or something? Like everybody could lose a ton of money regardless of what they had just because the stock market dropped. Like, is there like a smoothing process?
Well, we think a couple of things. I touched on this is that the fact that there would always be buyers in the market when this 15.3 is going in. Usually in a market panic, there's way more sellers than buyers, and that causes the market maybe to drop lower than it normally would had there been some buyers in there. But you've got enforced buying here every single pay period. So we think that will mitigate it somewhat. Now, there's still going to be down times, okay? That can't be avoided. But the other aspect is that the interest-free loans against your account kick in order to keep your account at a minimum level, so you're still getting your 4% if you're in retirement. If you're not in retirement, that will even out over time. I mean, the market, as you saw, over the last century has averaged about 10%. There are some severe down years in that, but if you're not in retirement, that's not so much a worry. If you are in retirement, you get interest-free loans against your account in order to keep your account up there until such time that the market does recover. So those are the and plus the buying all the time we think will mitigate the downside. Yes, sir.
What would be the steps in,
Well, you took a lot of notes here. I'm going to give you a quiz, I think. Look at that.
This is the second lecture.
And you have the
I've got
book.
stacks of notes that I've taken today. But my question was, how would it be set up? Because you've got basically three parties on the contract.
Yeah.
U.S. government maybe is the simplest one, maybe. But I was thinking about states. Different states will come in. Some will be yes, some will be no, maybe differences. And also, how does this private trust get? Who is it? How does that get going?
Well, it would be created by this contract, and so then.
Who's writing the contract, or how does it get set up?
Well, there'd be enabling legislation first to do this. I mean, so legislation is part of it. Enabling legislation would then bring up the contract to be done, and then when people opt into the trust, then trustees are elected, and it's off and running, kind of like a retirement trust, really, like a retirement plan. It would be that type of entity. Now, as for the states for states who didn't want to opt in, if a state did not want to opt in, well, then they're still on the hook for the Medicare and the Medicaid and their pensions. So I mean, there are some goodies here to entice the states to get in. And then also, when the debts are paid off and the 2% goes to fund states in lieu of taxation, I don't think a state would want to be outside of that gravy train, because they're going to want. I mean, that's years down the road, but still, that would be a powerful incentive for a state to want to participate in this.
How much
Yep.
does contract law change in that, you create the legislation which can be amended or whatever? How do you, what do I want to say, if someone can think of it better? What if contract law itself changes?
You mean prior to this being enacted?
Yes.
I guess that's I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on television, okay, is my answer to that. We'll cross that bridge if that happens. I don't know how radical a change it would be.
Does contract law change over 10 years?
I don't think that significantly, as far as I can tell, but you know, our plan is based on existing laws of our country. So if something changes,
Isn't talked about.
yeah. I mean, but the idea is contract is stronger than legislation.
Okay.
Merely, that's the idea.
One thing we do in insurance design, which for a little while was doing crop insurance stuff, but it was, we'd always think of, we've got some bright idea. Now, how is somebody gonna game it and screw it up? I was just trying to think of ways that this could be done. But you've got this huge pot of money. Now, if somebody can figure a way to in fact, there've been other proposals that are sort of like this for, social security or something like this. But if you can direct that to a set of companies, those guys are favored and the other ones aren't. How do you stop that? How do you put a firewall in to stop that from happening? Once this is set up, you've got a bunch of people who are looking at, man, we got the pot here that we can raid now. Because I think that's what happens.
Well, I mean, the money in the trust can only be spent on paying out participants or loaning or paying out current retirees.
Unless we change the law.
Well, but you have to change the terms of the contract, not just the legislation, you have to change the terms of the contract, and all the parties would have to agree to that in order to change the contract. So I don't know that the people represented by the trust would be interested in changing anything that took away their own money.
I'm thinking so much of them doing it. I mean, I've got several things bopping around my head, but one of them is, in the 2008 crisis, the bondholders for GM were supposed to be the first ones who got dibs on it, and the government just said, well, we're not going to do that. It's basically, how do you put firewalls up to stop that kind of raiding or something? Or have you thought about this?
Well, I mean, it
seems like when you get this huge pot, you suddenly attract bad behavior too from people.
you'd probably attract it. I just don't know how you get away with it in terms of the contract, in the sense that it can only be used for one thing. You know, in the with the Social Security Trust Fund, the politicians are the gatekeepers, and they said, there's a pot of money. Let's just change the rules and spend it what we want to, and we'll put in an IOU. No one has a discretion to do that here. So it's outside of government. This is a private trust. So we tried to think of what would safekeep, would bring back the lockbox, basically.
Right.
No one has told us why this couldn't work other than politically. I mean, the biggest losers in a plan like this are our politicians, because some power would be taken away from them. So that is, to us, the steepest hill here in getting something like this enacted. Yes?
So you mentioned that one key feature of the plan is that, using legislation to commission a contract, the trust is protected indefinitely, so you don't have the security issues associated with Social Security, Medicaid, et cetera. I'm thinking of the Supreme Court case. I think it was Ohio Life and Trust versus the Gold, but it essentially puts a prohibition on indefinite entrenchment of any one given piece of legislation. And I recognize you're using contract law, not legislation, but you need the latter to create the former, right? This is essentially a public-private partnership. Have you looked at all into whether there'd be constitutionality issues or legality issues more broadly with creating this?
I mean, the government enters into contracts pretty regularly. Governments at all levels do.
Yes, but the thing that makes this different is that this is indefinite, whereas most public-private partnerships, either A, have a specified timeline, or at least B, can be repealed by strictly legislative means. So this would be a one of a kind in that regard. Likely it seems because it would have to get around some legal barrier that's been there for decades and that nothing else has gotten around. Have you done much research in that area?
No, I haven't. Just again, because that's not my background. Terry's background and mine is more in investment advising, and we're really more on the investment side of something like this. That's where we've spent most of the effort. That would have to be looked at. I mean, there are, of course, there's some laws that are still on the books today from even the 1700s in our country. So I mean, some of these things can last a long time. It's important to make it so that it can't be monkeyed with or changed, so that it has time to grow and build up that 2%, that funding mechanism to retire the debt. So a contract, it's almost kind of like a treaty, I guess, in a way. It might be the best analogy. The Senate has to ratify a treaty, but when a treaty is in effect, it's in effect. So I guess both parties can break it if they want to, but once this contract is in effect, I don't think the participants in the trust will want to alter it because the goodies are so good. And it would be up to the people to break that if that was ever proposed. I don't know why they'd want to. I don't know why the people would want to take away these great benefits that would be created under this plan. That's my short answer. Anyway. One more. Yeah, hey, we'd love to have you. Thank you so much. I'll stick around a little while longer if you'd like. Thanks for coming. Where'd you get that book?
Sitting up there.
Oh, sitting up there, okay.